Well, welcome everybody. I'm Nate, if I haven't met you, and I'm so glad that you've come to church and joined us online wherever you're at. And in particular, I always think about people who, maybe you're in the room or maybe you tuned in and you're like on an adventure, you're trying to figure out what you believe, and it takes a tremendous amount of courage to join in. And so thank you for doing that. We call it being spiritually unresolved. And we hope that you find resolve, but we also hope this is a really safe place for you to ask questions about Jesus, investigate his teachings and his claims. So it's good to be back. I was off for a couple of weeks. Last week, one of my adult kids came home, and we got to spend a weekend together. And the week before that, I just thought, I don't know, every now and then I get some thought in my mind, like, I need adventure. And so I thought it would be this brilliant idea to ride my mountain bike with tent and supplies and water filter from Idaho to Butte, Montana on trails. And it was brilliant. I loved it. The introverted part of Nate, one day I went 18 hours without talking to anyone. And then this guy was coming the other direction, and he stopped, and we talked and grunted a little bit. And then I kept going north, and he went south. And I can sit down this week. I've recovered. It's been fantastic. But yeah, just a fun time. And I couldn't find anybody to go with me. Can you believe that? I was like, hey, hun, you want to do this? Kids, no. Like, nobody wanted to go. But next summer will be the rest of Montana. We have a very large state, by the way. So we're starting a new series. I'm excited about this. It's something I've been thinking about for some time. And we're going to talk about this field guide to winning the war in your mind. And for some of us, this might be a really foreign concept. And I completely understand that. The Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 is going to give us this outline for how to deal with this battlefield that's in our mind. Now, what do I mean when I say a battlefield that's in our mind? Well, the Bible seems to be really clear that there is an enemy of God. Okay, he's often called Satan. And he's also an enemy of people. And one of his primary tactics, it's not, like they make scary movies and all that stuff has some basis in reality. But I think if you really study the Bible, what the enemy does is the enemy primarily wants to plant lies in the mind of humanity. Okay, he is deceitful. And he's not trying to come to you and try to get you to believe in UFOs. Okay, he's trying to get and just fundamentally twist. When we're first introduced to him in Genesis chapter 3, he's trying to fundamentally twist who God is, the nature of what God expects of human beings, and drop into their minds a type of doubt or self-doubt or self-hatred. And that is his main tactic, and he's still at work. And the problem is, if he lies long enough and we listen, eventually what happens is what Paul is going to call a stronghold is developed in our mind. And when he uses the word stronghold, it was a Greek word that was used for a fortress made of stone that just seemed impenetrable. When another army would come up, they say, well, they're in their stronghold. Like, it's invincible. It's built so solid. And this is what Paul says. Those strongholds can actually be demolished. And part of the job of the follower of Jesus is to demolish the strongholds that exist in their lives so that we can believe the right things about who God is and who we are. Now, what this is not, it's not about positive thinking, okay? So, you know what I don't need? I don't need to start saying, Nate, you're good enough, you're smart enough, your mama loves you. That's not what I need. I need something far deeper and far more profound than that. And I believe that all of us need that. And that would be what Paul's going to talk to us about. So let me give you an illustration. Someone, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, who's close to me, they have permission to speak into my life, was talking to me, and they looked me in the eyes, and they said, Nate, you're tending to be very, very negative and critical right now. I was like, what? I'm Mr. Positivity. Are you kidding me? They said, no. And they gave me several examples. And I had to figure out, okay, what do I do with this? Because I wanted to be defensive, right? I wanted to make excuses for it. And there's a lot going on in the world. A lot of us are filled with anxiety. And we've got hurricanes and things in the Middle East. But I thought, you know what? I'm going to pause. I want to think about this, and I want to apply it. I've already been processing this next series. I want to try to apply this to my life. And can I actually be involved in the battlefield of my mind? Because most of us think this. My mind is just kind of passive, right? Thoughts come in, thoughts go out. I can't control my thoughts. But Paul presents a very different reality. He says, man, you're saved through no efforts of your own, right? That all comes through what Jesus did through his life, his death, and his resurrection. However, he says, if you're a follower of Jesus, you have this responsibility to be actively engaged in the war that is going to be going on in your mind, okay? So I just want to give you a couple of quotes because I think they kind of emphasize the importance of this. Here's my first statement. The life that I live, okay? The life that I live is a direct result of the thoughts that I think. If I am currently living a life that is characterized by depression, by anxiety, or by pride, right? That life is directly linked to the thoughts that I am thinking. So if my life, like it just feels empty, I feel worthless, all this, you know where that comes from? That comes from the thoughts that I think. In fact, my life will go in the trajectory of my strongest thoughts. And part of the challenge with these strongholds is this, is some of us have strongholds in our lives. They're falsities about who you are or about who God is that took root long ago. Maybe decades ago. It was a harsh word from a dad, whatever it might be. In this sense of like, I'm worthless, I'll never measure up, has taken root in my life. And that is actually one of the strongest thoughts that we have in our life. Therefore, it drives our behavior. How can we have the right thoughts, dismantle the wrong thoughts, and live the life that God has asked us to live? Let me give you a couple examples. Let's take a couple things that oppose each other. Have I spent more time this week? I just ask you. Being worried or being peaceful? So worried, I mean, that's a big one. You can be worried about the future of our world, worried about current events, worried about kids, worried about finances, worried about, there's just a myriad of different things. And we can get in the place where worry is consuming us. On the other side of worry would be this thing called peace, where I understand that the world is a very hard place, but rather than focusing on the worry, I have hope, I have anticipation, I believe that God is good in the midst of it. And the worry, yeah, I understand there's challenges, but I have this profound hope that resonates within me. Which one would you gravitate towards? Or this positive negative thing? When I'm negative, I'm critical of other people, I'm despondent, I see the worst in everybody and everything. On the other side, if I'm positive, like I see potential. I see, wow, in the midst of this, God can still do something. And we'll be going back and forth, all of us. Now, the passage that we're about to read is so often taken out of context, okay? And I understand why. And it's applied to like global ideologies and things like that. But it's really important. We're stringent on the context. It means something. And here's what's happening. It's 2 Corinthians chapter 10. It's in chapter 10, 11, 12, Paul is having to defend himself, okay? So we just finished a series in 1 Corinthians 1. This is now the second chapter. It's written a few years later. And Paul is no longer in Corinth. And here's what's happening. He has so many detractors and critics. And they are coming at him. And they are saying things that they have the potential to ruin a person. They're inferring that Paul is a hypocrite. They are inferring that Paul is empty-headed, that he's not eloquent enough, that Paul is lacking, that he's overly timid, that he's not educated enough in the world of Greek philosophy. He only has this ancient Hebrew form of education. And so Paul hears all these things that people are saying about him. And when we read this text, you'll see the verses before, and then we'll read verse 10. Paul is saying, this is how I'm dealing with all those negative thoughts, all those criticisms that are coming towards me. I'm gonna teach you how to deal with that. I'm gonna teach you how to win the battle that exists in all of our minds, okay? Let's read together 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1 through 5, and then verse 10. By the humility and gentleness of Christ, he sets this up. He says, listen, there's all this criticism about me. I'm gonna follow Jesus with humility and gentleness. I appeal to you. I ask you. I, Paul, who am, here's one of the criticisms, timid. I'm timid when face to face with you, but bold towards you when away. Some of his critics are saying, you're so hypocritical. When you're with us, you tell us you love us, but when you're gone, you write all these harsh things. I beg you that when I come, I may not have to be as bold as I expect to be towards some people who think that we live by the standards of this world. For though we live in the world, it's undeniable, the world is a broken place. We do not wage war as the world does. There's a way that the world wages war, especially with the mind. What do? You dominate, you speak louder. He goes, we don't do that. The weapons that we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine, that means God-given, spirit-infused, divine power to demolish, not just chip away at, okay? Not just slowly overcome, to actually demolish strongholds. We demolish, what do we demolish? Arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, okay? So anything that separates me from the knowledge of God, understanding who he is, what he says about me, those are the things that Paul says we demolish. These things that create more and more distance between us and God. And we take captive every thought. My mind is not a passive place. Paul says we take captive every thought and we make it obedient to Christ. Verse 10. Some of you are saying Paul's letters are harsh and powerful, but in person, he is a weakling. Okay, listen, guys, there's kind of nothing worse, right? It's like Back to the Future when you call Marty a chicken, okay? He's a weakling. They're actually attacking his manhood and has nothing worth saying. Ouch, 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 ouch. Okay, here's Paul, who I would say is one of the most brilliant human beings to ever walk the planet. We're still reading what he wrote 2,000 years later. Doesn't happen too often. If Paul's critics, okay, had said, you've got nothing worth saying, what would it be like if Paul's gonna sit down to write the Bible? You know, he's got to now write a book to the church in Ephesus. And he starts writing, he's got something he feels like is from God, but then here it comes. Oh, man, the people in Corinth, they say I have nothing worth writing. Dear Ephesians, have a good day. Lots of love, Paul. Paul's saying, if I let those thoughts, if I let those criticisms win the battle in my mind, I'm in big trouble. If when I stand up to lead, here's this guy that's trying to spread the message of Jesus throughout the Roman Empire. If I go to a new city and all I think is, man, the people in Corinth said I'm a weakling. It's true, right? Paul says, you know what I do with all those thoughts? I take them captive. Let's talk a little bit about this text. What does this mean? How does this apply to us? Number one, Paul says, if you want to win the battle in your mind, you have to understand that this is a different type of war, okay? Now, when we use the word war, we think about machinery and armies and weapons. And Paul says there's a war happening, but it's not the type of war that everybody thinks it is. We live in a world and we fight external wars. He says, but this is a different type of war. This is a war for what is true, okay? And what is your mind? What is your mind going to think about? What is your mind going to contemplate? What are you going to determine is true in your life? It's not a war. He says we don't fight the way other people fight. When criticism comes, what happens? Typically, if you out-argue somebody, it's through volume or vitriol. It's through, I can shout you down, I can out-argue you. He says, no. The way I'm gonna wage war with all these thoughts and all these criticisms, it's not the way that people deal with it. You don't puff up and try to be stronger and intimidate. He goes, no, this battle is in my mind. People are always gonna say things about me. By the way, Paul was constantly under attack. He was Jewish, and the Jewish teachers drove him nuts. The Gentile, the non-Jewish people, they had all kinds of things to say. He goes, listen, I'm not fighting them. I'm fighting the thoughts that creep into my mind that are untrue. It's a different type of war. And he says, part of what happens then is these strongholds emerge. Okay, so again, think of a fortress made of stone that seems impenetrable. He says, I am fighting a war against strongholds that exist in my mind and the mind of other people. And these strongholds become so ensconced in our lives that we don't even realize that they are there. Right? I just want to give you a couple of examples of what strongholds in the human mind can look like. Thoughts of failure. This idea that if I fail, I'm defined by my failure. I run into far too many guys. I'm going to speak to you for just a moment. Guys, I run into a lot of guys. There was something that was said, there was a challenge, there was like a statement of you're worthless from an influential man in your life, and you are so afraid. We become so terrified of failing that it leads to one of two things. One is we're incapacitated and we do nothing because we're so afraid of failure. On the other hand, we're so afraid of being a failure that we become workaholics and we're like dying for approval from some other authority figure in our life. This stronghold that I am a failure can take root in my life. The stronghold regarding my past. Okay, we get to this place and here's what we believe. We believe that what happened back there, the divorce, the failure, the moral compromise, we think that that thing now defines me. And we begin to think that I could never be forgiven. If anybody knew what my life was really like, and now we're identified by our failure. And that is a stronghold that Paul says you have to find a way to break that. It can't define you. God says that there's a new future for you. What's another stronghold? Addictions. Okay, when we think about addictions, we typically go to drugs and alcohol, and those are very real addictions. And I understand a lot of us have been fighting that, have history, have loved ones stuck in addictions. But addictions can be much broader, right? You can have a spending addiction. There can be addictions when it comes to sexuality, all of these things. And pretty soon this addiction begins to define me. It becomes a stronghold. Anybody of us who have faced those, we understand. I've tried, but man, this thing is so big and this fortress is impenetrable. I've gone through programs. I've gone through confession. I've tried it all. We feel hopeless. What is an addiction? I spent a little bit of time talking to drug and alcohol counselors, and most of them agree on this, that your addiction is typically a way to deal with pain. There is something that's so wrong, so broken in me, I can't handle the feelings. And so if I can find myself in the midst of addiction, I don't feel the pain any longer. I'm not an addict. I don't have to be an addict. That's a stronghold that Paul says can actually be broken. Fear, worry, anxiety, depression, all of these things that just a little bit at a time, like I start worrying and anxiety and depression start to build up around me. And pretty soon it's like, I want to get out, but I don't know how, because I begin to believe lies about God. I begin to believe lies about me. And I'm ensconced in this prison. Our culture, a couple particular ones. Escapism can be a stronghold. You ever notice that, like, you're the problem, right? Sometimes we get into this place where, like, well, if I wasn't married to this person and didn't have these rotten kids and this rotten job, like, life would be great. And we think it's over there. If I could just escape, well, then I'd find happiness. Never works, does it? Never works, because the problem is I take me wherever I go. I take my brokenness wherever I go. Greed. It's just a statement that if I could only have, and you fill in the blank. Is it more money, more power, more influence, nicer car, bigger house, whatever it is. If I could only have this, then I'd be happy. And greed is a stronghold in our lives, making us think that it's external things that can bring joy and peace to the human heart. Secrets, if anybody knew. It makes us feel unlovable. It makes us feel that not only could God never accept me, but people couldn't accept me. And so we live with this stronghold of a secret that we hide. And we think that we could never be accepted because of what's in there. Those are the strongholds that creep in. But there's a whole nother side to them. Those are all like pain-oriented difficulties. There's another stronghold that exists in the human heart, and it's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, and it has to do with pride. Some of us, it's not pain or failure that defines us. It's like, I am so capable. God, you're lucky to have me. I'm such a good person, right? You look like, well, I'm not in prison. I must be, the top 10% of good people in the world, right? And then we get into this whole other stronghold of thinking that we're self-sufficient, that we're responsible, that we can depend on us. Because many of you are very, very capable, very intelligent, have good jobs. That's a whole nother stronghold that can exist where I'm not dependent on God. I'm dependent on me. Stronghold. So it's a different type of war. Then Paul says this. So if you're in a different type of war, you need to have a different type of weapon. A different type of weapon. And he says this about the weapon. It's funny, he never actually defines it. He says, we have a weapon that's divine in its origins. Divine in its origins, meaning this doesn't come from you and it doesn't come from me. It's from God. And he says, here's what you can know about this divine weapon. It has the power to demolish strongholds. The power to demolish strongholds. What is he referring to? Paul doesn't say explicitly. But if you went to Ephesians chapter 6, Paul talks about something very similar. And he says, hey, you are in a battle. And he says, I want you to put on the full armor of God. And he walks through a helmet and a chest plate and everything. And he says, and you only have one weapon. Only one weapon. You got plenty of defensive things. You got a shield. He goes, here's your weapon. It's truth. Calls it a sword of the Spirit. It's the things that God says about you. I think Paul is saying the only weapon that can deal with the strongholds that exist in our lives that have held us captive is truth, not positive thinking, okay? It's truth. That when I come to this place where I think I'll never change, okay? I'm in a stronghold of addiction or failure. Here comes the divine truth. If anyone is in Christ, they are a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. The truth that God takes my sin and he separates it from me because of the cross as far as the east is from the west. Then there's a stronghold of pride in my life where I begin to think I've got it all together. Here's the truth that demolishes that. It is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is a gift of God so that no one can boast. All of your righteous acts are like a pile of filthy rags. That's the truth. This divine weapon that begins to address the lies of the enemy that exist and create strongholds in my life. Truth demolishes strongholds, lies. It's the only thing. Now, he says it's a different war, it's a different type of weapon, and he says, and you have to understand it's a different enemy. Okay, so typically when we think of enemies, you think of a person, another human being, and too often, I will humbly say this, too often we identify people as the enemy, and Paul says, it's not my critics in Corinth that are my enemy, it's the lie that's the enemy, right? So Paul doesn't say, hey, I'm gonna set those guys straight and talk to them. He says, here's what I have to do. I can't control what people say about me, but I can control the nature of the lie, and the lie is the enemy. The lie that I am insufficient, the lie that I don't have anything to say, the lie that I am timid, the lie that I'm a weakling. He says, no, that's my enemy, okay? I'm not gonna focus on the people in Corinth. I have plenty of detractors. What I'm gonna focus on, I can only control if I let those things that they say about me take root in my mind. If I let them take root in my mind, I've lost the battle. So he says, your enemy is the lie. So please, as we think about this for the next several weeks, the lie is never the person. The lie is the mistruth that has been spoken into our lives that continues to deceive us. He says, that's what you're focusing, that's your enemy. And then he goes through and he says, and you're gonna have a different type of victory. Okay, so it's a different type of battle. We don't wage war the way other people do. You've got a completely different weapon. You've got a different type of enemy, and you need to have a different type of victory. He says, and here's how I'm making steps towards victory in my life. He says, I hear what they say about me. You know what I do with those thoughts? Instead of just being passive. Maybe I am a weakling. So I look at those thoughts, and the minute these lies begin to resonate in my mind, I go after them, and I take them captive. I am managing my mind, okay? Here, you and I have two options. Your mind will manage you, or you will manage your mind. Right? If your mind manages you, you will be driven by whatever you believe. If I choose to manage my mind, it's a whole different thing. And so Paul says, I am gonna go out and I'm gonna find these lies that begin to resonate, and I take them captive, and then what do? I make them obedient to Christ. I grew up in a family, I'm the oldest of 5, all brothers, first 4, right? And we would have these like wrestling matches that started peaceful and then just moved into chaos and swinging and, okay. How did you win a wrestling match? It's always the funniest phrase to me. If I could twist my brother's arm behind his back far enough and get him to say uncle, right? Also why not grandma but uncle. Uncle is like a sign of submission. So this is what Paul does. He says, when all this is happening, I'm not just gonna stand there and think about what they're saying is true. I wanna realize who I am. I remember Acts chapter 9, I'm nobody. God finds me. God says, hey, you're gonna be my chosen instrument to take the message of Jesus to the non-Jewish world. Wait a minute, what you're saying about me isn't true. I'm gonna take that lie, I'm gonna make it captive, and I'm gonna make it say uncle. I'm gonna twist its arm till it's like, I give up. God really does love you. You have something good to say. It's just an entirely different way of thinking of managing my mind. Now, I gotta show you a really short video clip, and if you love calves, just ignore this. The calf is fine, okay? His calf is gonna be fine. But as I was thinking through this and what the original Greek word means, it's actually Paul saying, I attack. I am not passively letting my mind lead me. Okay, so those of you who are online, this might be hard to believe, but we still have roundups and branding here in Montana. And I often get invited as comedic relief. I love it, it's so fun. Because I have no skills, can barely ride a horse, can't throw a rope. But they always bring me the biggest calves and tackle them, get them on the ground. And then we do horrible things to these calves, horrible things. For their future, it's for their good. It's not pleasant at the time. Just imagine that your mind is an arena, okay? And it is. It's an arena. And every day, maybe every hour, maybe every 10 minutes, a thought is going to be released in your mind. And you have to determine, is that from God or is that from the enemy? And if it's from the enemy, this is what I want you to do.
Three-time champ, let's watch him go to work. Now to this calf in a hurry. He needs a little help from you. Wrap him tying, hands a flying. Shane Hanchey. He's good.
7.6 seconds. What if I could begin to manage my mind the way Paul managed his mind? I'm saved by grace. It is all about Jesus. But Paul says, if you're a follower of Jesus, you got a part to play. And I guarantee you, before you go to bed tonight, before this week is over, there are going to be dozens of these lies. Some of them you believe. I believe it about myself. They're going to be released in my mind, and I'm going to have to make a choice. Do I let that thing run around in the arena? Because here's what I'm afraid of. You let that little calf run around in the arena long enough, you feed it, you give it enough time, it becomes a big bull. And it's a little bit harder to tackle. That's called a stronghold, right? And that thing needs to be demolished. But can the little things, can I say, no, that's not true. I'm out there. I'm on top of it. I'm going to tie that thing up. And I'm looking down at it. I'm saying, now you're obedient to Jesus. I'm not obedient to you. I am not insufficient. I'm not unlovable. My past doesn't define me. I'm going to tell you the truth. That if anyone is in Jesus, they are a brand new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. I'm not going to worry anymore. That thought of worry, that thought of anxiety, because Jesus said this, I don't want you to worry about tomorrow. Who of you by worrying by even as much as you possibly could add a moment onto your life? Instead, Jesus says, I want you to look around. I want you to look and see that I take care of birds and I take care of flowers, and my Father loves you more than birds or flowers, so you better bet he's gonna take care of you. So you take that anxiety, you take that worry, that will no longer dominate my life. I want to end with just a couple of questions. Number one, can I begin to think about what I'm thinking about? Okay, so we're all going to think about things. But the question is, will I actually think about what I'm thinking about? Because most of the time, those thoughts, they just come and it goes, and pretty soon, like, I guess so. I want you to be discerning. I want you to think about it. Is that from God? Is that me? Is that an enemy? Is that a lie that it sets itself up against the knowledge of God? Is this something that's pushing me farther from who he is? Second question would be this: what are my strongholds? Okay, so some of us, it's super obvious. Like when we're talking about strongholds, you're like, yeah, I know. I think it's in the plural, not the singular. But would you think through it? Especially if you're not really sure. There may be a stronghold in your life that has been a part of you for so long that it's hard to even realize that it exists. Third question: am I willing to take my thoughts captive and make them obedient to Christ? I refuse to be obedient to my thoughts.